My great fellow Americans, earlier today, on the eve of the Thanksgiving holiday, two members of the National Guard serving in Washington, D.C., were shot at point-blank range in a monstrous ambush-style attack just steps away from the White House. They had been deputized as part of the most successful public safety and national security mission in the history of our nation's capital, the D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force, which has achieved an unprecedented reduction in violent crime and crimes of all type. This heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, and an act of terror. It was a crime against our entire nation. It was a crime against humanity. The hearts of all Americans tonight are with those two members of the West Virginia National Guard and their families. The love of our entire country is pouring out for them, and we are lifting them up in our prayers. As we are filled with anguish and grief for those who were shot, we're also filled with righteous anger and ferocious resolve. As President of the United States, I am determined to ensure that the animal who perpetrated this atrocity pays the steepest possible price. I can report tonight that, based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan. We're not going to put up with these kind of assaults on law and order by people who shouldn't even be in our country. We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan under Biden, and we must take all necessary measures to ensure the removal of any alien from any country who does not belong here or add benefit to our country. If they can't love our country, we don't want them. America will never bend and never yield in the face of terror. And at the same time, we will not be deterred from the mission these service members were so nobly fulfilling. That is why tonight I can announce that I have directed the Department of War to mobilize an additional 500 troops to help protect our capital city. We will make America totally safe again.
Would you want to know what caused Trump to say this and make these new decisions? Stick around, but make sure you subscribe and tell us which part of the world you are watching from in the comments. What you just heard wasn't a response to one isolated incident. Within the span of just 48 hours in late November 2025, two separate events involving Afghan nationals sent shockwaves through America and triggered one of the most dramatic immigration crackdowns in recent history. On Tuesday, November 25th, an Afghan man was arrested in Texas after posting videos threatening to build a bomb and target Fort Worth.
An Afghan national now facing terroristic threat charges after he posted a video saying he was building a bomb with Fort Worth, Texas, the intended target. Christina Coleman joining us live with the latest on that story from the Southland. Christina.
Hi, Kevin. Yes, DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin says just one day before the terrorist attack against the National Guard in Washington, D.C., another Afghan national who was paroled into the U.S. under Biden's Operation Allies Welcome program was arrested for threatening to blow up a building in Fort Worth.
Then, just one day later on Wednesday, November 26th, another Afghan man opened fire on National Guard members in the heart of Washington, D.C., steps away from the White House, killing one and critically injuring another.
The two National Guardsmen carried firearms but didn't stand a chance. An ambush in broad daylight, 2 blocks from the White House.
When a suspect came around the corner, raised his arm with a firearm and discharged it at the National Guard members.
A third guardsman shot the gunman, who was quickly buried under the weight of police and other members of the Guard. Right alongside, Secret Service officers worked frantically to save the lives of the wounded guards.
2 incidents, 2 Afghan nationals, 2 days, and a complete transformation of U.S. immigration policy that would affect hundreds of thousands of people. This is the complete breakdown of what happened, who these men were, and how their actions have reshaped the future for an entire community of people who once fought alongside American forces. Hashtag the Washington, D.C. shooting, November 26, 2025. Let's start with the incident that captured the nation's attention and claimed an American life. It was 2:15 in the afternoon on Wednesday, November 26, 2025. The location was near Farragut Square Metro Station, in the area of 17th and I Streets Northwest in downtown Washington, D.C. If you know the area, this is literally a few minutes' walk from the White House. National Guard members were conducting what's called high-visibility patrols, essentially walking the streets in uniform as a security presence. Without warning, without provocation, gunfire erupted. A man armed with a .357 Smith & Wesson revolver opened fire on the National Guard troops. According to prosecutors who later detailed the attack, this wasn't random shots fired in panic. This was methodical. After one guardsman was struck and fell to the ground, the shooter leaned over the fallen service member and shot them again. Another guardsman was hit multiple times. The victims were two members of the West Virginia National Guard, 20-year-old Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and 24-year-old Air Force Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf. Both were shot in the head, but these guardsmen didn't go down without a fight. During the attack, one of them managed to stab the shooter with a pocket knife. Another guardsman returned fire, shooting the attacker 4 times. The violence was stopped, but the damage was already done. Emergency responders rushed both victims to the hospital. They were in critical condition, both fighting for their lives. The shooter, also seriously wounded but stable, was taken into custody. By Thursday evening, November 27th, Thanksgiving Day, President Trump made a devastating announcement. Sarah Beckstrom, just 20 years old, had died from her injuries. Andrew Wolf remained in critical condition, still fighting. A young woman who had sworn to serve her country was gone. Another service member was clinging to life. And the nation wanted answers. Who was the shooter? Why did he do this? And how did he end up in the United States in the first place? The suspect's name is Rahmanullah Lakanwal. He was 29 years old at the time of the shooting, born on February 9, 1996. He's an Afghan national of Pashtun background from Khost province in Afghanistan. Now here's where his story gets complicated, and it's important we understand all the details. Lakanwal's relationship with the United States didn't begin in 2021. It began when he was just 15 years old. Back in 2011, he started working with the CIA. Specifically, he was part of what was called a Zero Unit. These were CIA-backed paramilitary groups within the Afghan National Directorate of Security that operated in Kandahar province. These units were controversial. They conducted nighttime raids on suspected Taliban members and were known for their brutal tactics. Some called them death squads. But from the American perspective, they were assets in the fight against the Taliban. Lakanwal went on to serve in the Afghan army for a full decade, working directly alongside U.S. Special Forces troops. For 10 years, this man fought the Taliban in support of American military operations. He risked his life repeatedly in a war that the United States was leading. Then came August 2021, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, the chaotic scenes at Kabul airport, the desperate evacuation. Lakanwal, like thousands of other Afghans who had worked with American forces, now faced a terrifying reality: potential Taliban retaliation for his years of service to the United States. On September 8, 2021, Rahmanullah Lakanwal entered the United States under Operation Allies Welcome. This was a humanitarian program created by the Biden administration specifically to resettle vulnerable Afghans who had worked with U.S. forces and were now in danger. He settled in Bellingham, Washington with his wife and 5 children. He worked as an independent contractor for Amazon Flex, delivering packages to support his family. From the outside, it appeared he was building a new life in America. In 2024, Lakanwal applied for asylum with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. His application was approved in April 2025, and this is important, during the Trump administration. He was granted asylum legally. His request for a green card was pending, but he was not in the U.S. illegally. He was a legal asylee with approved status. But something was wrong. According to multiple law enforcement sources, investigators believe that Lakanwal was suffering from severe paranoia and other mental health challenges. Despite his legal status, he believed that authorities were trying to deport him from the United States. This fear, whether grounded in reality or manufactured by his deteriorating mental state, consumed him. In the days before the shooting, Lakanwal made a decision. He got in his vehicle and drove approximately 2,500 miles across the entire country, from Bellingham, Washington to Washington, D.C. That's roughly a 40-hour drive. We don't know what went through his mind during those long hours on the road, but we know he arrived in the nation's capital armed and ready to commit violence. The rest, as they say, is tragic history. But remember, the DC shooting wasn't the only incident that week. Just one day earlier, another situation was unfolding in Texas that would become part of this larger story. On Tuesday, November 25, 2025, law enforcement in Texas arrested another Afghan national named Mohammad Dawood Alokozay. The reason for his arrest? He had posted a video of himself on TikTok that set off alarm bells across law enforcement agencies. In the video, Alokozay indicated that he was building a bomb, and he specifically threatened to target the Fort Worth area in Texas.
هیچ مشکل نیست. در کجا هستی؟ آدرست در کجاست؟ آدرس یک دقیقه بدارم مایک سبیلیت بسته که برادر. آدرست در کجاست گفتی؟ دالاس پورت ورت. انتحاری رو در کجا جور میکنی بامبا؟ انتحاری همینجا جور میکنم. باز کافر هم انتحار میکنی و سریتانم میکنم، سری کافرتانم میکنم. کسی که افغان مخالف باشه سری و انتحاری میکنم. ایره چه رقم انتحار میکنی؟ میکنم. استی گفتی درست است؟ تکسال هستم دالاس پورت ورت. بام گفتی در داخل موتر جور میکنی. همین نشان نباشه. صبر یک دقیقه بدار.
Think about that for a moment. A man openly posting on social media, showing that he's constructing an explosive device and announcing his intended target. It was brazen, it was public, and it was terrifying. Alokozay was immediately arrested on state terror charges and taken into custody at a corrections center in Tarrant County, Texas. This wasn't a situation where authorities had to build a complex investigation over months. The evidence was right there, posted by the suspect himself on one of the world's most popular social media platforms. So who is Mohammad Dawood Alokozay? Like Lakanwal, Alokozay came to the United States as part of Operation Ally's welcome under the Biden administration. He was admitted to the U.S. on September 7, 2022, almost exactly 1 year after Lakanwal arrived. And also like Lakanwal, Alokozay had legal status. He became a lawful permanent resident in 2022. He wasn't some person who had snuck across the border or overstayed a visa. He had a green card. Following his arrest, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, lodged a detainer on him. This means that even if he were to be released from state custody for any reason, ICE would immediately take him into federal custody. Now, we don't have as much detail about Alokozay's background as we do about Lakanwal's. We don't know if he worked directly with U.S. forces in Afghanistan. We don't know the full circumstances of why he qualified for Operation Ally's welcome. But what we do know is that he was admitted to the country under a program designed to protect Afghan allies. And just 3 years later, he was arrested for allegedly building a bomb and threatening American lives. Let's pause and look at the timeline here, because the proximity of these events is crucial to understanding what happened next. Tuesday, November 25 th. Mohammad Dawood Alokozay arrested in Texas for bomb threats. Wednesday, November 26 th. Rahmanullah Lakanwal opens fire on National Guard members in D.C. Wednesday night, November 26 th. President Trump addresses the nation from Mar-a-Lago. Think about what was happening in the White House and in Trump's administration during those 48 hours. On Tuesday, they're getting reports of an Afghan national arrested for bomb threats in Texas. Before they can fully process that incident, on Wednesday afternoon, another Afghan national commits a deadly attack in Washington, D.C., blocks from the White House, killing a National Guard member. 2 Afghan nationals. 2 threats to American lives. 2 days. For the Trump administration, which had already been vocal about stricter immigration enforcement, this was a critical moment. These weren't hypothetical scenarios or statistical projections about security risks. These were real, violent incidents happening in real time, and they involved individuals who had been admitted to the country under a program championed by the previous administration. The response was swift, severe, and sweeping. We've already heard part of Trump's statement in the video at the beginning, but his response extended far beyond that single address. Over the next several days, Trump and his administration unleashed a series of policy changes that would fundamentally alter immigration processing for Afghans and beyond. Wednesday night, November 26th, the initial address. That evening, speaking from Mar-a-Lago, Trump didn't just address the D.C. shooting. He framed it as part of a larger national security crisis. He called the shooting an act of evil, an act of hatred, and an act of terror, and said it was a crime against our entire nation. But Trump quickly expanded his focus beyond just this one incident. He blamed the Biden administration for bringing Lakanwal to the United States, arguing the attack underscores the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. He claimed that 20 million unknown and unvetted foreigners had entered the U.S. during Biden's administration, calling it a risk to our very survival. His language was stark. He described Lakanwal as a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. Then, notably, Trump broadened his comments even further, targeting Somali immigrants living in Minnesota. He claimed they are ripping off our country and ripping apart that once great state, describing Somalia as a country that has no laws, no water, no military, no nothing. Why bring up Somalis when the incidents involved Afghan nationals? It suggested that Trump was using these specific incidents as a springboard to address broader immigration concerns that extended well beyond Afghanistan. Trump announced he was determined that Lakanwal pays the steepest possible price and called for a re-examination of all those who entered the United States from Afghanistan during the Biden administration. He also requested that 500 additional National Guard troops be deployed to Washington, D.C. Within hours of Trump's address, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services made an announcement that sent shockwaves through Afghan communities across America. Effective immediately, processing of all immigration requests relating to Afghan nationals is stopped indefinitely pending further review of security and vetting protocols. Just like that, thousands of Afghans with pending applications, many of whom had risked their lives working with American forces in Afghanistan, saw their cases frozen. Families waiting to be reunited were now in limbo. People who had been in the application process for months or even years suddenly had no timeline, no answers, and no path forward. The next day, which was Thanksgiving, while many Americans were gathering with family, Trump held a call with service members and continued to hammer his message. He announced Sarah Beckstrom's death and used it to reinforce his characterization of the shooting as a terrorist attack. During his remarks, he held up a printed photograph from the 2021 evacuation of Kabul, that famous image of Afghan evacuees sitting on the floor of a military cargo plane. He suggested that the shooter was mentally unstable after the war and his departure from Afghanistan. When a reporter asked whether he planned to deport Lakanwal's wife and 5 children, who were still living in Washington state, Trump responded, "We're looking at the whole situation with family." That response sent another chill through Afghan communities. If you came to America legally, if your family members hadn't committed any crimes, could you still be deported because of what one family member did? During the Thanksgiving call, Trump described the shooting as a terrorist attack and called Lakanwal a savage monster. But his rhetoric expanded beyond the specific case. Referring broadly to immigration seekers, he said, "We don't want them," characterizing them as gang members, mentally ill, and previously incarcerated. A reporter asked Trump directly, "Do you blame all Afghans for the alleged actions of one?" Trump's response, "No, but there's a lot of problems with Afghans." The reporter followed up, asking about Trump's comments regarding Somalians. What did they have to do with the D.C. shooting? Trump admitted, "Nothing," but then added, "Somalians have caused a lot of trouble." That night, Trump took to Truth Social to post an even more dramatic statement. He railed against immigrants from what he called impoverished nations, accusing them of being a burden on the nation's welfare system and preying on natural-born citizens. Then he wrote, "I will permanently pause migration from all third-world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover. Only reverse migration can fully cure this situation." The term reverse migration was startling. It suggested not just stopping new immigration, but potentially removing people who were already here. By Friday, the Trump administration's response had expanded far beyond just Afghan nationals. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Director Joseph Edlow announced that all asylum decisions nationwide were being halted until we can ensure that every alien is vetted and screened to the maximum degree possible. Read that again. Not just Afghan cases. All asylum decisions across the entire country were frozen. Venezuelans fleeing dictatorship. Ukrainians escaping war. Syrians running from conflict. It didn't matter. The entire asylum system was now on pause. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed on social media that the State Department had paused visa issuance for all individuals traveling on Afghan passports. This meant Afghans abroad who had been approved for visas couldn't travel. Students, workers, family members of U.S. citizens. The door was closed. But the administration wasn't done. Less than 24 hours after the shooting, Trump officials began ordering comprehensive reviews that extended far beyond Afghanistan. They announced a review of all asylum cases that had been approved under the Biden administration. They also announced a review of green cards that had been issued to citizens of 19 different countries. The two incidents involving Afghan nationals had triggered a wholesale reassessment of America's entire immigration system. Before we continue with how this affected the Afghan community, let's take a moment. If you're finding this breakdown helpful and you want to stay informed about major news stories like this, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. And we're curious, how is this story being covered where you live? Drop a comment and let us know. Imagine for a moment that you're an Afghan who worked as a translator for U.S. forces. You spent years helping American soldiers, putting your life at risk every single day. When the U.S. withdrew, you applied for a special immigrant visa because you knew the Taliban would kill you if you stayed. You made it to America. You've been working hard, paying taxes, learning English, raising your kids as Americans. Then in 1 week, two people who share your nationality commit acts of violence. Suddenly, every Afghan in America is under scrutiny. Your pending visa application is frozen. Politicians are talking about reverse migration. People look at you differently when you speak Pashto on the phone. Your children come home from school asking why their classmates' parents are saying Afghans are dangerous. This wasn't a theoretical scenario. This was the reality for tens of thousands of Afghan Americans and Afghan refugees in late November 2025. Samad Sudri, a 34-year-old Afghan-American data analyst who has lived in Washington since 2007, long before Operation Allies Welcome even existed, spoke about the fear gripping his community. People are really terrified of what is going to happen, he said. There are hundreds and thousands of people who are not in the U.S., and they have every right to be here. But then you have acts of violence like what happened on Wednesday that basically kills their chances. That fear wasn't unfounded. It was already happening. Sultana Salam, founder of the Afghan Association of Central Virginia, spoke about the specific terror that refugees in her community were experiencing. Many had direct experience with Taliban brutality. They knew exactly what would happen if they were forced to return to Afghanistan. They could be imprisoned, tortured, killed, Salam explained. Young girls wouldn't be allowed to attend school anymore. Think about that. These weren't people afraid of economic hardship if they were deported. They were afraid of torture and execution. And their daughters, who had tasted freedom and education in America, would be condemned to lives of forced illiteracy under Taliban rule. Thought they had finally found safety. And now, through no fault of their own, they were afraid again. Not everyone in the Afghan community was silent, though. Some pushed back against the narrative that these two incidents represented the Afghan community as a whole. Sean Vandiver, president of the San Diego-based group Afghan Evac, released a statement emphasizing a crucial point. Afghan allies who worked with American forces undergo some of the most extensive security vetting of any population entering the United States. Multiple background checks, biometric data collection, interviews, reference checks with U.S. military personnel. The process typically takes months or even years. Vandiver argued that this individual's isolated and violent act should not be used as an excuse to define or diminish an entire community. He was trying to make a simple point. Two people do not represent 100,000. After the sweeping policy changes were announced, Vandiver issued a sharper response. They are using a single violent individual as cover for a policy they have long planned, turning their own intelligence failures into an excuse to punish an entire community and the veterans who served alongside them. That last part, the veterans who served alongside them, highlighted another dimension of this story. It wasn't just Afghan refugees who were affected by these policies. It was also American military veterans who had served with Afghans, who had promised them safety if they helped America, and who now felt that promise was being broken. The political and community impacts continued to unfold. The legal system was preparing to process the two suspects. For Rahmanullah Lakanwal, the D.C. shooter, prosecutors initially announced he would be charged with 3 counts of assault with the intent to kill while armed and criminal possession of a weapon. These are serious charges that carry lengthy prison sentences. But after Sarah Beckstrom's death was announced on Thursday, prosecutors said the charges would be upgraded to first-degree murder. This elevated the stakes considerably. Attorney General Pam Bondi made it clear the government intended to pursue the harshest possible penalties. In an interview with Fox News, she said the U.S. government planned to bring terrorism charges against Lakanwal and seek a sentence of life in prison at a minimum. After Beckstrom's death, Bondi suggested she would seek the death penalty. As of the latest reports, Lakanwal is not cooperating with authorities. He's hospitalized recovering from being shot 4 times and stabbed, but he's not providing information about his motivations or whether anyone else was involved. For Mohammad Dawood Alokozay in Texas, the details of his legal case are less publicized, but he faces state terror charges related to the bomb threats. The ICE detainer means that even if he were somehow to be released from state custody, he would immediately be taken into federal immigration custody. Both men face the prospect of spending the rest of their lives in prison. But in many ways, the legal cases are just the beginning of the story. The ripple effects of their actions will be felt for years, if not decades. So what comes next? The Trump administration has announced reviews of asylum cases and immigration programs. But what does that actually mean in practice? Will families be separated? Will people be deported to countries where they face persecution or death? Will the immigration system remain frozen for months or years while reviews are conducted? And what happens to the hundreds of thousands of people caught in limbo? We open this video with President Trump's statement. We've now walked through the complete timeline of what led to that statement and what has followed. 2 incidents in 48 hours. 2 Afghan nationals. 1 killed an American soldier. 1 allegedly threatened to build a bomb. And in response, an entire immigration system was transformed. There are no easy answers here. National security is real. The threat of terrorism is real. The grief of Sarah Beckstrom's family is real. Andrew Wolf's fight for life is real. The fear in Afghan communities is real. The betrayal felt by American veterans is real. The promises made to Afghan allies were real. All of it is real. And all of it matters. As this story continues to develop, as the legal cases move forward, as policies are implemented, as reviews are conducted, as lives are changed, we'll be here to break it down for you. What do you think? Are the policy changes justified? Should Afghan allies face collective consequences? What would you do if you were making these decisions? Let us know in the comments. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss our coverage as this story continues to unfold. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that behind every policy and every headline, there are real people whose lives hang in the balance.